tuning in. I'm Lin Weaver, and our distinguished guest tonight is Sarah Leah Witson, Human Rights Watch Executive Director for the Middle East and North Africa. She's a champion for human rights, and she will be the speaker tonight for the lecture titled As Aleppo Burns. It has been 69 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the UN General Assembly in Paris in 1948. Has the Declaration lived up to its promise?
Well, the Declaration is an aspirational document, and I think it sets the moral compass and the legal compass of what we as societies, as nations, as states should aspire to. And in that sense, I think it has very much lived up to its calling and its purpose and its mission in setting that standard and setting the bar of where we all agree we need to be.
Do you think that in addition to Human Rights Watch, there are organizations today which are effective in defending human rights in the world? Could you name a few?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are many excellent human rights organizations, international ones like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, of course, PEN, the Committee to Protect Journalists. These are organizations that operate globally, as well as organizations that are dedicated for particular purposes, like Landesa, which is a leading human rights organization working on land rights. There are also domestic organizations in particular countries that work on human rights issues and do so not only effectively but very bravely, taking upon themselves the risks of operating in human rights unfriendly countries.
How does Human Rights Watch go about uncovering and reporting on human rights violations? Could you tell us a little bit about how you operate and within the organization?
Sure. So we are divided organizationally geographically by different geographic divisions, a Middle East division, Africa division, Asia, and so forth, as well as thematically. Different divisions focus on women's rights, children's rights, LGBT rights, and so forth. And the model that we use is very one based on fact-based research, on-the-ground investigations of human rights abuses that have at their heart gathering the testimonies of victims, witnesses to human rights abuses, corroborating those testimonies with physical evidence, such of course as medical evidence that will corroborate testimonies about torture, evidence from physical fragments of weapons that are used that will corroborate the types of weapons that are used, how they were used, satellite imagery that will show the span or the width of a particular abuse, such as mass home demolitions in a particular space. And we gather all of that facts and information, and we typically will produce reports that are often written, but also will include video and audio segments. Mm-hmm. We disseminate that information broadly. We, of course, seek responses from governments or armed groups, whoever may be implicated in the abuses. And then we seek to meet directly with the governments or armed groups in question, or the international community, international governments in question, to advocate for the abuses to end.
You travel a great deal for Human Rights Watch, and sometimes you find yourself in a very risky situation. Can you give me an example of a particularly tricky situation you've been in lately?
Well, the most challenging situations are when we're operating in environments of armed conflict. There is nothing more insecure than a war or fighting, where the violence is indiscriminate. And so it's not that we are concerned, or I'm concerned that I'm going to be targeted because of my work, but just that I'm in the wrong place at the right time. And that has been the greatest challenge to our work in the Middle East, securing our staff, the security of our staff. And we have been, on many occasions, much closer to the front lines of many conflicts in the Middle East than we wish we had been, whether it's in Syria or Libya or Iraq or Yemen, Gaza. Sadly, the list is very long. I do travel to conflict zones regularly. I was supposed to be in Yemen just a few weeks ago, but had to cancel the trip at the last minute. But probably the travels in Yemen and Libya have been the hairiest because we are operating in an environment where the state does not have control, armed groups are in control, and so you really don't know who's in power from moment to moment. In Sana'a, at one point, following the overthrow of the President Hadi there, when I was in the country, we knew there were numerous kidnappings that were happening by Al-Qaeda, literally kidnappings by motorcyclists that would abduct Westerners from cars. And there had been a recent kidnapping in Sana'a, and so for a few days I had to stay in the hotel room and just couldn't leave, didn't leave as a matter of a security precaution. There are other times when I've been places where the airport that I was meant to fly out of has been bombed or closed, and so I had to find another way of leaving the country. There have been times when the road to the airport has been blocked by militias, and so had to navigate and negotiate gaining access to the airport and the airplane. And, these are just circumstances that we sometimes have to deal with. But in all cases, the reality is that we are much safer because we are more prepared and ultimately are trained to a certain degree to be in this environment. And the greatest risk and the greatest danger is faced by ordinary civilians and ordinary people. So whatever situation we're in, it can never compare to those who have to live in war zones day in and day out.
This is a fascinating account, and you are indeed a champion for human rights. I'm going to ask you, what motivates you? Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've been asked this question before. Mm-hmm. Is there something in your life that happened that made you decide that you wanted to pursue this path?
Well, I think that the answer is very much tied to my identity, my cultural heritage, my history. Growing up as an Armenian, my mother's Armenian, going to an Armenian school and learning from a very young age about the horrors of the Armenian genocide and the injustice of the Armenian genocide that has never had any accountability, where perpetrators have never been held accountable. And witnessing and observing and experiencing the scars that continues to leave in our community and has left in our community for over 100 years now, very much ingrained in me an understanding of what injustice means and how it feels to be wrongly treated. And I think that having been a victim of human rights abuses as a community makes you identify with the underdog, makes you identify with those who are powerless and voiceless, and I think naturally aligns one's worldview with those who are mistreated and mishandled by society. So it absolutely is very tied to my upbringing in that sense.
Sarah Lee, I've been wondering for quite some time about this sovereignty and the status of sovereignty, which is very much ingrained in the UN Charter. And as you know, I think that many people think that limits our power to intervene, whether it's wars or other human rights abuse, in those instances where it's within a country. Mm-hmm. And of course, the most tragic example at the moment is Syria. Mm-hmm. Is there a way around that?
Mm-hmm. There very much is a way. I mean, state sovereignty does not mean state license to violate the human rights of one's citizens or the population under one's control. In fact, not a feature that state sovereignty protects. International law does have jurisdiction over the human rights responsibilities and respect for human rights treaties that states have signed. Almost every state in the country has ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and a variety of other international treaties, as well as treaties that govern the use of weapons and the manner in which wars are conducted, like the Geneva Conventions.
Right, yes.
And so they are international laws and international norms that do restrict the way in which states can act with respect to their own citizens, over whom they otherwise have sovereignty in a wide variety of spaces. Now, enforceability of human rights obligations is a different matter, and sadly, there are limited means in which human rights responsibilities and obligations can be enforced. There is, of course, under the UN Charter, the Security Council is authorized to take military action for the security of the world.
The world, yes.
But that has to be by a Security Council resolution.
Yes.
The only other case in which military intervention is authorized formally is through self-defense. There's another concept that is more recently developed in international law, and that is the notion of a humanitarian military intervention. That says that the international community has an obligation to act, including by military means, when there are mass atrocities, when there's genocide.
Of civilians and other people. This is great to know. It's reassuring, actually, but enforceability is the main problem. There are many more subtle denial of human rights, not just killings and torturings. Can you think of anything that, for example, for me, denying the human rights of free basic health care is a violation of human rights? Would you agree with that?
So economic, social, and cultural rights are part of the basic package of human rights, and that includes the right to health and a healthy environment. That includes the right to food, that includes the right to housing, that includes the right to education.
Yes.
And international law has recognized these as progressive norms that we seek the progressive realization of, subject and, of course, within the means of particular states. So there is an international obligation for each state to provide health care, education, and so forth to its population within its means and within a formula and a strategy to progressively realize the full implementation of economic, social, and cultural rights. Again, that remains an aspirational goal because some states, sadly, do not have those means. But I would say that in probably nearly every case, states choose to misallocate their resources, failing to abide by their human rights obligations to fulfill the basic economic, social, cultural needs of their population.
In a few minutes, you're going to give a lecture, and the lecture is titled as Aleppo Burns. We all know where Aleppo is, of course, in Syria. How do you see the situation in Syria evolving? How do you see it?
Well, I certainly have many personal feelings on the situation in Syria. I have family in Syria. I've lived in Syria. I was baptized in Syria. The Armenian community in Syria goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. But that doesn't necessarily shape my political analysis or evaluation of the facts in the country. And looking at the facts in the country, it's very clear that there is a momentum to push for some kind of a peace deal, sadly in a way that will not in any way, shape, or form fulfill what initially motivated the uprising in Syria, which was democratic freedoms.
That's right.
I do agree that the first priority right now has to be to end the war and the killing and the suffering in the country. I am very concerned that particularly with the new administration here in the United States, that there will be increased incentives to normalize President Assad as a continued leader in Syria, notwithstanding the crimes against humanity that his administration has been responsible for. Nevertheless, I do see that as the most likely trajectory. A big question mark remains about his ability to secure all of the country. We may well see pockets, whether it's a Kurdish area or Sunni areas, that he has limited control over, similar to the fact that the government of Iraq does not control Kurdistan.
That's right. Yes.
And so what exactly that looks like politically, I think, is yet to be seen. But it does seem that there is an increased acceptance of Assad's continuation in the country.
Which is really outrageous in my view, because he has been killing and torturing so many people, and it's with this fantasy that they're all ISIL or Daesh revolutionary and terrorist, which of course everybody knows that is not true. At least this is my personal view on that. The younger generation, not even the millenniums, but even younger than the millenniums, have you been observing that there is more awareness of what human rights are and the lack of human rights? And if yes, how can we continue to make them much more aware that human rights violations are intolerable and therefore we should get engaged and defend people who don't have a voice and who are the victims of this? What is your opinion on this?
Well, I can't say I'm the most knowledgeable about the thoughts and views and interests of the younger generation. I'm not an educator. I don't work with students and so forth. And I think those in the university community will have a much better pulse of what the younger generation is thinking. But with my limited observations, I think what troubles me the most is the level of cynicism and defeatism that I hear expressed and see among many in the younger generation, as well as a level of passivity and resignation that is enabled and made possible by the level to which people can isolate themselves in a community of their friends and so forth via social media, via entertainment that allows them to opt out of participating in the broader community. In terms of what can be done, I think certainly knowledge and education and facts is critically important. But it's more than that. I think that we have to affirm and teach and model empathy and compassion and care for the people immediately around us. It's very hard to engage and connect a young person about what's happening in Syria because that's tens of thousands of miles away, and they may feel powerless and irrelevant to whatever happens there. But there are things in our own communities that are happening under our nose that are well within our power and our control to be engaged in, and that's where it should start. That's where all community engagement should start.
And this is also what Eleanor Roosevelt said. Human rights start in the region near you. I'm paraphrasing her. Sarah Leah Witson, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. And I wish you all the luck in the world, and I'm really so honored that I've got to meet you and talk to you for a few minutes. And thank you, all of you, for watching. And if you'd like to see this interview, you can go on our website, and this interview will also be uploaded to YouTube. Thank you so much, and please join us again.